I was actually invited to do a series here. We call it Kintsugi series. And it's all about the gospel. I'm excited to share with you, to present another angle to appreciate the gospel according to this. Thank you, Sister Mags, for giving us a good kick-off, understanding the beauty in brokenness, which is the series of the name of the series for the whole week that we'll be delving and digging deeper as far as the gospel is concerned. So I'm going to invite you all. Today's the beginning. This afternoon we'll have fellowship, potluck. But right after the potluck, I'm not quite sure if it's already announced, instead of having session 2 in this building, in the sanctuary, we will stay at the fellowship hall because we will be engaging in some sort of kintsugi activity. Kintsugi is a Japanese art form. If you're closely listening to the children's story today, it is kin is gold and sugi is repair. It is the process of putting back together something that is broken. But once it's put together, just like what the story was saying, it is going to be more valuable because of the golden lacquer that is used in piecing this together. And the beauty, what makes more beautiful is because of the golden lacquer, and sometimes they use platinum to outshine the brokenness of the vessel. So that's going to be the theme, our theme for the whole week. So, Scars of Grace is another way of highlighting kintsugi. Again, the theme is finding beauty in brokenness. So today is our first session. Let me see if it's going to work. So, finding beauty in brokenness. Where do we do that? Where do we usually do that? Now, one evening, maybe this was about 6 or 7 years ago, it was 12 midnight or 1 a.m., my sister called me. When I answered the phone, I don't understand anything she's saying because she was crying out loud. She was calling my name repeatedly, and she was crying, and she was saying, you know, your nephew tried to harm himself. It's a very broken moment, very dark. So if you're going to ask me, are those brokenness, do they count? Can you really see beauty in the midst of the night, hearing a mother cry, lamenting because her son tried to harm himself? Now, I'm a chaplain, but once it hits home, I just end up crying with her, not knowing what to do. It was so dark. Now, next slide, please. If we consult Webster, one of the definition Webster has, as far as defining hell is concerned, he says, a place or state of misery, torment, or wickedness. Maybe we pause, we ask this question. Is that included in the brokenness, Pastor Geof? Are you saying we can still see beauty in this kind of brokenness? What my sister was experiencing is hell. It's a state of misery, it's torment, and certain level of wickedness in there, or unfairness, injustice. And we might be dressed beautifully today, Sabbath, but we do have our own place of suffering. So maybe you're coming here and asking, can we really find beauty in brokenness? Now, thank you. For the next slides, please. Jesus on the cross. What is that? Is there torment there? Is there suffering? Is there pain? I think that is hell as well. You know what? I think that's hell. Okay, it's working. Thank you. Because hell, some would say, is the God-forsaken place. Do you remember when Christ was crying, why? My God, why? Why hast thou forsaken me? That's Christ's hell at that moment. So maybe the question is, really? Are you saying that we can see beauty in brokenness? It takes a lot of process, my friends. And unfortunately, each one of us, as I see your faces, your beautiful faces today, I cannot just jump to conclusion that you are the most perfect individuals that I've met in my life. I know there are some cracks out there. We have our own brokenness. The good news is that even Christ himself experienced brokenness. So welcome to our journey today. And this week, our journey is to finding beauty in brokenness. So, we'll start with our origin, okay? Our origin. So, here's the question. What does my origin tell me? When I say origin, maybe DNA is included, my beginning. Do you remember your beginning? Maybe you're too young to have those memories to recall, right? Maybe a vulnerable baby. And we are somehow defined by our DNAs. We are defined by our, whether humble beginning or not so humble beginning. But here's the question. When you think of your origin, when you think of your beginning, what does your beginning, your origin tell you? I know we don't have enough time to have discussion, but I want you to keep this in mind. If we can trace our beginning, it is very hard to understand who we are as individuals. But the Bible says we are what? Created in God's image. That is our beginning. We are all God's children. Okay? We are all God's children. And maybe you say, okay, fine, I mean, that's almost a cliche. We heard that. But can you really trace God's DNA in you if you are God's children? Pastor, can you trace God's DNA in you? What is God's DNA in you? 1 Corinthians 13:13. This is God's DNA, something that remains in us. It is there from the very beginning. The good news is it never leaves. It is there. 1 Corinthians 13:13, now abideth what? Faith, or we call faith trust, to use it as a verb, hope, and love. Paul says these three remains forever. And of course, 1 Corinthians 13 is a love chapter in the Bible, and it says the greatest of all is love. But I want to highlight God's DNA in us, because if we can no longer trace this DNA as God's children, we are in serious trouble. Okay? I call this DNA our innocent freedom. When I say freedom, especially expressed by an innocent child, You cannot argue the fact that this child being birthed into this world has just this wonderful, powerful expression of who she or he is. The innocence is there, but the freedom is there. For example, in the child's ability, the freedom to trust. The freedom to trust. If you say to a child at a very young age, jump, they would. Especially if the person who would say is the mother or the father, the relationship, the identity that they have with this individual is secured in comfort, in love, in assurance. Now, the question is, who taught a child to trust? There is no school for little children to teach them how to trust. Children by nature are trusting. That's God's DNA in them. You know, whenever I remember a child, there are 3 C's, you know. They coo, they cuddle, and they cry. The cooing part is this. It is the comfort that says, I know I have relationship in this world that I can trust. Of course, they don't know how to speak, but when your eyes locked, you know, mothers especially, do you remember those moments? When you're looking and staring at the eyes of your child, there is a complete trust. You know what? There are many people who are questioning and asking God, why do bad things happen to good people? But a sister of that question is this: why would God allow a very vulnerable child to be born in this very imperfect and unsafe world? Why? Because God has confidence that in this child's ability to trust, trusting in the world, regardless if you are coming from poverty or riches, it doesn't matter. There is the same amount of trust that this child is giving you, trusting in the goodness of your heart, believing that you would take care of this child come what may. Who placed that trust in this child? This is, brothers and sisters, faith. And it remains forever. It's not only that. There's also this love, the cuddle. You know, when you see a child with their old smile, and when they were born naked, and they were just, you know, when they smile and see you, and excited, the arms, the little arms and feet, you know, the body is longer. It's just out of proportion. It is very weak. It can't walk. There's no strength to sustain oneself. But it doesn't matter. The excitement of this child, the connection of this child, knowing that they belong. No one taught them that. How come they know that they do belong? It is God's DNA. Each one of us, when we were born, at one point, we believe in unconditional love. We don't have to have wonderful things. It doesn't matter if we were born with cleft palate. It doesn't matter if we were born with only one eye or only one arm. You can still see a smile in a child, believing that that child is going to be loved unconditionally. It is indeed a safe world, because once that child grew up, then he would realize a new language that adults speak about love, which could be conditional. But from the very beginning, brothers and sisters, this child, the DNA of God, could be seen in these little babies. And finally, this is the cuddle. I don't know if this is, the hope. This is the cry. When you hear a child cry, it says something. If it's wet, it says, "Mommy, change my diaper." Now, if the child sees mommy cooking and very busy washing clothes and things like that, the child will not say, "Oh, okay, no, don't worry. I can still wait, finish your cooking, maybe later." No. The child believes that they do matter. They know that when they cry, someone would take them seriously. This is hope. Hope that they can be valued uniquely and beautifully by the other. So when they cry and when they demand milk, when they demand warmth, when they demand change of diaper, when they demand cuddle, they believe that in your eyes, they do matter. So these three, coo, cuddle, and cry, the language of a child, is an expression of faith, love, and hope. It is in us. Unfortunately, this innocent freedom could be abused, misused, could be hurt, could be impeded, could be changed, could be shapen differently as we grow and live in this imperfect world. But I would like to put this in context. Talking about parent-child relationship, I want you to notice what happened when Christ was being baptized in Matthew 3:17. Do you remember in Matthew 3:17, the windows was opened, and then people they saw a dove, and they heard voice, picture of Trinity, if you may. Now the voice says, "This is my Son, whom I love, and in whom I'm well pleased." In other words, the Father who was talking, expressing this beautiful affirmation, saying, "Do you see this? This is my Son." The basis of this is on eternal relationship. Jesus hasn't done anything, but at that moment, the affirmation and the proclamation, the declaration for people to recognize is that there is a significant relationship between Jesus and the voice that was speaking at that moment. And it's not just that this Jesus was so loved, and this Jesus do matter. The one speaking says, "I'm so pleased with this individual." Now, I would like you to keep this in mind, because this is the same exact feeling that we do have in our relationship with our parents when we were young. So applying this principle, let me define further what trust is from the context of "this is my Son." Trust is resting in the certainty of our identity as His beloved children, or God's beloved children. That is trust. One day, if you heard this story, there was a little girl who happened to be living in the White House. The president was in his office, and doors after doors after doors were guarded by agents, making sure that the president is protected, of course, for him to do his work, and at the same time, they don't want the president's life to be at stake. But as this little girl rushed through these doors, the agents opened the door, and they kept letting the girl running until she reached the Oval Office. And then she says, "Daddy, I've been looking for you." You see that confidence? Why is this little child has the freedom to just rush to the Oval Office to meet the president without knowing whatever business or schedule the president has? Because the father, which just happened to be the president, I think that was Reagan, says, "Whenever she wants to see me, you let her be." And this child was so naive, but so trusting, that her trust rests in the certainty of her identity as God's or his dad's beloved child. That is trust, trusting our identity. Okay? Now, whom I love, Jesus said. This is the definition of this from that perspective, that love is the assurance of our belonging as the cherished children of God. We belong. Trust, we have identity, and we could trust in the identity that we are God's children. But love is we know we are connected. You know, when a child, have you tried to take them to the park? I remember when my girls, have two girls back then, they were maybe 2 and 3 or 4 and 5. We keep them taking to the park, right? And Max and I would just sit from a distance, and then they would just play with other kids, and then they would become anxious. Why? Because they forgot that, where's dad and where's mommy? Where do they sit? At the park. And then all of a sudden they see us, and then smile again, and then play again. What is that? We call that connection. As long as they see the connection, the presence of their care providers, the people that love her, they feel so protected and so secure. Once the parent is away, the anxiety of this child is going to kick in. This child, they know that they belong. So love is the assurance of our belonging as the cherished children of God. And finally, what is hope? God said from the voice, "This is my son whom I love, whom I am well pleased." There is a strong connection between the Father and the Son. And it is not achievement. It is not delivery of services. It is not good grades from school. It is not wonderful accomplishments in sports. Hope is the unshakable peace that we are deeply and uniquely valued in His eyes. It is the joy that we experience because we know we count, we matter, we are significant. These three, they remain, Paul says, forever. And these are the marks that we could keep to prove that we are created in God's image and to prove that we are His children. Now, Genesis 3, enter the enemy. And the enemy's purpose is to destroy our freedom to trust, to love, and to hope. Remember in Genesis 3, when all of a sudden Adam and Eve no longer trust each other, that they have to cover themselves in shame? Remember in Genesis 3, they no longer feel connected, that they have to hide from the Father who is promoting the message that I love you, you belong to me. But in the Garden of Eden, they went hiding. They no longer belong. And you remember that they started blaming one another, wondering because if I'm not going to blame you, then it's going to be me. But if I'm going to be responsible for this, then maybe I'm doomed. There's no longer this sense of peace that they are valued by God. This is what happens in Genesis 3. But this is also what happens in our life growing up. Do you remember the first time your innocent freedom was broken? Maybe some of the brokenness was you were way too young to remember. But brokenness after brokenness, they do happen. Maybe all of a sudden when you were 5 years old, 6 years old, then the memory starts coming. Do you remember when the person that you trust start to abuse you? Do you remember when the person that you love gave you a very confusing message that you can only be loved if you're good enough? Do you remember when the person who's supposed to value you for simply being you, all of a sudden abandoned you, neglected you, or ignored you? These are the things that Satan would like us to experience to finally break our innocent freedom. Now, how do we keep ourselves safe from this brokenness? Sometimes we think the way to keep ourselves from brokenness is to find a place where we'll never go hurt again. But here's the thing. If you numb yourself to protect yourself from the pain of brokenness, you're also numbing yourself to experience joy. You're also numbing yourself to experience trust. You're also numbing yourself to experience love and hope. Because they are all together. You can separate. When you love and yet you don't want to get hurt, where will you find that? People just decide, I'm not going to enter into a relationship again because it's so painful. But it's the twin sister of love. So if we keep on protecting ourselves because that's how we see how to fix these things, then we are also sacrificing some of the things that we need to experience. So I'm going to bring you back to Jesus' cry on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? People were saying, you know what? I thought, they said, Jesus is God, that he can endure all things, all kinds of pain and suffering and wickedness. Why would he say, why? Why have you forsaken me? Actually, Jesus was quoting Psalm 22. But I believe that Jesus was also experiencing the pain. Now the question is, what happened to the affirmation? The affirmation that says, you are my son, identity, whom I love, belonging, and I'm well pleased that you do matter. What happened to that affirmation during Christ's baptism? The heavens was so dark that Jesus couldn't feel the presence of the Father. What happens there? Can we see beauty in this brokenness? If we talk about Japanese art, kintsugi, this is the kintsugi of all kintsugis, the broken body of Jesus Christ. But let me invite you, my friends, just to think about this. Think about this. What Christ has experienced is a traumatic experience, excruciating pain. And it shows when he was shouting these words, my God, why have you forsaken me? So there's no doubt that that is a very alienating, hell-like experience, forsaken place that Jesus was feeling at that moment. But I know he endured. Okay, a traumatic experience is one thing, okay? And in this series, we will know that trauma is another thing. Trauma is what we experience after traumatic experience. Trauma is the belief we form, belief that are lies as a result of a traumatic experience. Example of trauma. If you are abused as a child, the trauma is you no longer believe that you are loved or valued. Therefore, when it happens, what is painful is not the memory of the physical assault. What is painful is the memory of reminding yourself that you are not loved, you are not valued, that you are not significant. That's trauma. But Christ experienced a traumatic experience, not trauma. Christ never demonstrated any trauma after the very traumatic experience in the cross. Why? Because after his resurrection, we all know that Christ, with this symbolic kintsugi, if you may, is giving us new hope, new light, new life, right? But let me go back to the Calvary. Because people were shouting. And the shout of the people is this. Last week, we were singing Hosanna because we thought you were the king. Now you're hanging on the cross. What happened? Can you live to your name as the Messiah? Can you save yourself? We've seen you feed 5,000 men, excluding women and children. We've seen you raise the dead, raise Lazarus from the dead, and other people from the dead. We've seen you cure and make the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf speak again. We saw you do that. Why can't you just save yourself right now? And in the middle of this mocking noise from all the people of the world at that moment, instead of demonstrating his power, Christ, in his submission and pain, he said, why, my God, why? Why have you forsaken me? The more the people got disgusted on this Messiah because he failed to deliver according to their expectation. But here's the beauty in this brokenness. Are you ready? When Christ was crucified on the cross, yes, it is not the affirmation that you heard in the river Jordan when Christ was being baptized. It is not affirmation for Christ, but it's an affirmation for each one of us. This is John 3:16. Let me paraphrase. I don't know why it's not working. Next slide, please. I want to show you something that I would paraphrase. Okay, fine. Oh, it's working now. Okay, let me do it. Okay, good. Christ's cry of abandonment on the cross on one hand, You know that abandonment, that cries? That cry is also the resounding affirmation of God's love for us. Because if you will read John 3:16, it goes like this. For God so loved the world that He what? He gave His only begotten Son. When He gave, it's going to look like that. A Christ crying on the cross because of abandonment. But that is exactly what John 3:16 is. It's also the resounding affirmation of God's love for us. For God so loved the world that He gave. Because, brothers and sisters, we too are His beloved children, in whom He is well pleased. So if you're broken, then this is now the appeal. If you're broken, if you were abused, if you were betrayed, if you were abandoned, if you were used, manipulated, I'm really sorry if you have those kind of experience. But here's the good news. There's nothing that could separate us from the love of God. Neither death, nor sorrows, nor everything that you have experienced in life. Because God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son for us. May God bless us all. Thank you, dear loving Father, for allowing us to grow in You. Thank You for allowing us to see that we are also Your children, that You love, and that You are well pleased. Help us, the Lord, to forget about our disbelief, our effort to make things work because of our insecurities. May You please continue to give us the confidence we need in Christ. And I also ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
To reach a friend with the Christ-centered message of hope and wholeness. This has been Anderson SDA Church in Northern California. Thank you for joining us. For more information, visit our website at andersonadventist.org. We look forward to seeing you next time.